Today, the Southern Baptist Church voted to oppose in vitro fertilization. I'm Dr. Lucky Seacon. I'm a double board certified OBGYN and fertility doctor based in New York City. And I want to talk about this headline and why it's important, why it's something that we should all be paying close attention to. The Southern Baptist Church is the country's largest Protestant denomination with over 13 million members across the country. And the opposition to IVF for them is based on this idea that conception begins at the fertilization of an egg. Because IVF is aiming to overcome the inefficiency of human reproduction, and trust me, human reproduction is very inefficient. Every time you ovulate an egg, if you're even in your 20s, which is considered really good from a fertility standpoint, with high egg quality, we presume, there's only a 20 to 25% chance that that ovulated egg could actually result in a pregnancy. And that number decreases with age because our egg quality decreases with age and there are no repair mechanisms. When we do IVF, instead of just working with one ovulated egg, we're trying to grow as many of the eggs and get them to mature and fertilize as many of them as we can, knowing that many of them aren't destined to turn into healthy embryos. From my perspective as a fertility specialist, it doesn't take much for an egg to become successfully fertilized. It's almost like a given. The majority of eggs will fertilize successfully, but it is a big leap to go from a fertilized egg to an embryo 5 to 7 days post-fertilization. And this is the stage of development that the embryo will be in before it has an opportunity to implant into the uterus. Approximately only half of fertilized eggs are capable of turning into embryos. And even once they get to that stage, many embryos will be abnormal. Even in your 20s, 20 to 25% of embryos will be abnormal. In your mid-30s, it's like a third of embryos that will be abnormal. In your later 30s, like 37, 38, 50% of embryos are abnormal, meaning they won't implant or they will surely result in a miscarriage if implantation occurs. And over 40, you're looking at rates of over 70% of embryos being abnormal. Now, let's say you genetically test the embryo and you know it has all of its DNA and it's healthy. Well, even then, it may only be like a 50 to 60% chance that the embryo could implant and result in a live birth. And so it takes a lot of fertilized eggs to be successful, especially when it comes to IVF, when the whole purpose of IVF is to try to make a really inefficient process, trying to conceive on your own, more efficient. And even with all of that technology, it's still pretty inefficient. So here's the problem with all of these conversations about personhood and wanting to ban IVF or oppose it. Most of the people having these conversations have little to no idea about how IVF works and the inefficiency of human reproduction. And the things that they're proposing as a potential solution to allow for IVF to continue, but under terms that make them feel comfortable, could have devastating consequences on people that are trying to build their families, like limiting the number of eggs that you're allowed to fertilize so that you don't have this possibility of having excess embryos. That will drive up the number of cycles required to be successful. It will drive up the cost of treatment and make IVF less accessible and less likely to succeed. It could also lead to there being laws or rules imposed on individuals or families in terms of the predisposition of their embryos that they have stored, and basically just taking away their autonomy and reproductive control, which is not good. Now you might be wondering, why do we care what this church voted? How does that affect us? How could that affect the law? The truth is that this church holds a lot of sway. House Speaker Mike Johnson is a Southern Baptist. So we're talking a large group of people in this country, including influential political leaders, and this conversation reflects the opinion of a lot of Americans. Now that you've heard my perspective as an IVF doctor, I want you to hear from Emily in your phone on more about personhood bills and what we can do to stop them.
Hi, I'm Emily in your phone. I used to be a lawyer in the Senate, and I have been tracking the conservative war on reproductive rights for a number of years. And what we have seen over the course of the past 10, 20, 50 years is a push towards personhood amendments. The head of the Southern Baptist Convention said recently, when sperm meets egg, God said, let there be life. A personhood amendment is an idea that at fertilization, not even implantation, life begins. And therefore that embryo and everything that stems from that should be given the same rights and responsibilities of a person under the law in the United States. This is what happened in Alabama. The Alabama residents enshrined a constitutional personhood amendment. And so then the Alabama Supreme Court, when confronted with the decision about whether IVF should be allowed, said, well, everything involved in IVF, those are legal people. And everyone you create, if you lose it, that's murder. And it created tremendous legal liability. But what we are seeing from the Southern Baptist Convention this isn't like an isolated fringe incident, right? Like, this is part of a extremely well-funded and extremely strategically well-planned legal and legislative strategy to fundamentally transform people's ability to access reproductive care in this country. And at the end of the day, Alabama stepped back their laws a little bit, but they are moving towards a redefinition of what it means to be a person in this country. We are seeing personhood amendments across the country in state legislatures, and we are seeing the beginning of impact litigation to redefine what it means to be a person under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. There is a way to block this. We can change the trajectory of this country. We don't need to allow them to go after our ability to access reproductive health care. In the Senate this week, they are voting on a Right to IVF Act. There are electoral ways and movement building ways we can definitely stop this from happening and ensure that everyone in this country has access to reproductive freedom and IVF.